Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. This game has two versions, the original for the Nintendo 64 and the 3DS remake. They both have their pros and cons. I opted for the Nintendo 3DS just because it has some quality of life features. For instance, you have a updated inventory system using the touchscreen on the bottom of the 3DS alongside with the map. Plus you have gyro controls when aiming, which is always nice. Now I did play this on the new 2DS, so I didn't really play around with the 3D effects, but I rarely ever do whenever I play a game on the 3DS. Plus, I spent a lazy Saturday trying to get my game footage to be captured on a better system than aiming the phone camera at my 3DS, so let me know if you like that better or if you liked it when I aimed the camera at my 3DS. It took a while to get set up, but I do think that I have the game capturing system down now. Okay, so The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is, in one word, iconic. It is to action RPGs that Mario 64 is to 3D platformers. It pretty much like defined a genre. And in the gaming community, it is quite revered. You're going to have a hard time coming across a gamer who has not at least heard of Ocarina of Time. And for good reason. Like, it is really such like an iconic game. It does make me a little nervous taking a more non-biased approach to this casual review. I mean, all my reviews have bias in them in some way or another, but I'm trying to look at this game as a newcomer may look at this game and not somebody who has been playing this game for quite a while. And to be honest, I really only ever played the beginning of this game as a child. I never owned it myself until my early 20s, and so whenever I would rent or borrow this game, more often than not, I would just play the child part of the game, and I rarely ever finished the game. In fact, I think I was maybe probably like 18 or 19 when I finally did play through the whole Ocarina of Time. And so yeah, it's like I have nostalgia for the beginning part of the game, but not necessarily for the end part of the game. So let's talk about the plot a little bit. I will try to be kind of spoiler free, but again, this game is fairly old at this point, so no major spoilers, but I will have some minor spoilers scattered here and there. You play as a young Link. Eventually you find out that you're the chosen one, and your job is to defeat the evil Ganondorf, the protagonist in most of the Legend of Zelda games. There is a segment about a fourth of the way into the game when you discover the ability to time travel. Basically, young Link enters the Temple of Time and he is put to sleep for 7 years till he is actually old enough to defeat Ganondorf. And in that time, the world of Hyrule that you're playing in is devastated because Ganondorf is able to run free for 7 whole years unopposed. Now you are able to travel back in time by planting the Master Sword in the pedestal of the Temple of Time, and so you kind of have a Chrono Trigger-esque situation here where you can play as young Link and you can play as adult Link. More often than not, you will be playing as adult Link, but there are situations where you will need to go back and play as young Link. In addition to time traveling, you are also given the Ocarina, which you can then learn songs that have various effects, like sometimes they make doorways appear, sometimes they make hidden passageways appear, change night to day to night, make it rain. There's also songs that you learn that can fast travel you to certain locations, and I do feel like the Ocarina adds to the whole feel of the game. It makes it feel really mystical and magical. Learning a new song is always exciting, even if you don't plan on using it very often, and it is cool. You basically just have to like press the button sequence in a certain order in order to play the song. You have a whole song list that you can refer to, like how do I play the song to summon my horse to me, and you can like look that up. But also it is fun to just kind of play around with the Ocarina and make your own music. I believe that the control stick on the 3DS can also change the tone of the Ocarina, but that might just be in Majora's Mask. I can't quite remember now. So in order for adult Link to defeat Ganondorf, he needs to use the Ocarina and his time travel abilities in order to rescue all of the sages, and using their combined power, he should be able to defeat the evil Ganondorf who has claimed waste on Hyrule. I really like the juxtaposition between young Link's Hyrule and Adult Link Hyrule. Young Link, when he's exploring Hyrule, the world is very lively and magical and fun, and then when you turn into Adult Link, a lot of the places are scary and evil and broken down. Especially Castle Town, because when you're there as a young Link, you got the fun, boppy music, people are dancing around, there's dogs running around, and then in Adult Link, once you go to the Castle Town, it's full of these creatures called Re-Dead, which are basically like these terrifying zombies that make this blood-curdling screech, and then they climb on you and suck your health. It's terrifying. But there are lots of different biomes and environments. It wouldn't be a Legend of Zelda game, well, it used to not be a Legend of Zelda game, unless there was a wide variety of dungeons in which you can explore. So you're gonna do a couple of them as young Link, but then the majority of them you will be doing as Adult Link. Starting off with the Deku Tree, which is more of like an entry-level dungeon. Now this one I know just like the back of my hand, because like I said before, I would play through the beginning of this game a ton of times as a kid. But as we progress through the game, I get less and less familiar with how to navigate these dungeons, and so it gets more and more difficult for me to solve the puzzles. But exploring the Deku Tree is very environmental. It's a ton of like mystical, woodsy mood. The boss is like a giant spider too, which is really cool. And normally when you explore these dungeons, you are going to be navigating through the dungeon. You eventually find a new item that can help with traversal, and then that will open up pretty much the rest of the dungeon in order for you to complete. You're also going to find a map and a compass that will help you navigate. Compass, not as much, but the map is nifty to have, especially with that bottom screen on the touchscreen to see exactly like where you're going and what rooms you haven't explored yet. The Dodongo Cave is like a volcano. That one's kind of interesting. I wasn't too crazy about the item that you find in that one. Jabu Jabo is probably one of my least favorite dungeons. Now, environmentally, it is very different and unique, but you're basically like inside a giant fish, and I just don't like how the walls and the floor and the ceiling all kind of look same. I also just remember being really frustrated with this dungeon as a child. Like, I can appreciate it more as an adult, just in its uniqueness, but it is always, I just have PTSD from playing through this dungeon as a child. Then you do most of the dungeons as Adult Link from here on out. So you go to the Forest Temple, which is one of my favorite dungeons, especially for the music. The music in this temple is awesome. And aesthetically, I like how you're navigating through all these warping rooms that can change. Sometimes you're like walking along the walls, and sometimes you can like rotate with the puzzles. And basically you're like navigating through this forest temple trying to defeat the 4 ghosts, the 4 Poes, in order to light all the torches to get down to where the big boss is. The fire temple is pretty samey. Like I'm never too crazy about the fire and lava kind of environments, just because they're pretty much prevalent in every single RPG that I ever play through, and so usually I'm not too excited to play through like a fire environment anymore. The ice cavern is kind of like a mini dungeon. It's not that big, but you do need it in order to get an item to progress to the water temple, which is probably the most infamous dungeon in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Now, it is more manageable in the 3DS version, just because you're trying to navigate this temple, this dungeon, with water all over the place, and so you're constantly needing to turn on your really heavy boots in order to walk through the water. On the Nintendo 64 version, you did have to pause, go to your heavy boots, unpause, and then you'd have to pause, take off your heavy boots, unpause, and in the 3DS version, you can do that with the click of a button. It can be still very difficult to navigate the water temple, especially if you don't initially know where to go and you're playing through it for the first time. There are 3 different water levels, so you're constantly raising and lowering the water in order to navigate through the dungeon, and so it's just clunky. Not as bad as I remember it being in the past, but still probably one of my least favorite dungeons. But the Shadow Temple is really cool. I like the Shadow Temple mostly for the environment. Everything is spooky, and there's lots of Re-Deads all over. There's a really creepy boss that has like all these hands sticking out of the ground that can like grab you as he slowly crawls towards you. It is terrifying, and so environmentally, I really like how dark they got in this game with this dungeon. The item that you're mostly going to be using in this dungeon is basically like this magnifying glass that can reveal hidden walls and passageways. Usually not too crazy about items like that in video games that reveal secrets, because it doesn't feel like it's helping me navigate. It's just giving me information. And I hate always having to toggle between the two different modes of using that magnifying glass and not. But environmentally, this dungeon's like top notch. Probably my favorite dungeon is one of the last ones, that being the Spirit Temple, and in this one you actually get to do a little section of it as young Link before you have to revisit it as adult Link. So I like that. I like that you get a shield that is like reflecting light, and so you kind of have to like aim your mirror shield to bend the lights to activate puzzles and things like that. I also really like the final boss in this game, in this temple, and it's like the two witches that you have to like bounce. So like one shoots fire, one shoots ice, and you have to like reflect the fire into the ice one, and then they like fuse together. Really cool. And then obviously you have Ganon's castle. This one isn't so much a dungeon as like 6 mini dungeons that you have to do, but it is worth mentioning, and it is exciting being at the very final confrontation. Now, as far as challenge, no, this is not a FromSoft level of combat here. Remember, this came out in the N64. It's very primitive combat, but still revolutionary for the time. You basically have a lock-on system, and you're going to be using this a lot. As you lock onto an enemy, you can kind of like strafe around them, you can hit them with ranged attacks, but you're basically just going to be swinging your sword. You have different sword movements depending on like how you're moving when you activate your attack, but most of the time you're just going to be having your shield up, wait for the enemy to strike, and become vulnerable for a sword strike on your own. Now, you do have like lots of items that can help out here. I tried using Deku Nuts a lot more than I usually do, and they are a consumable item that you throw down and it stuns enemies, so then you can get like a really strong lunge attack on them. You get magical powers from the Great Fairies that can do various things like shoot fire all over the place. You get bow and arrows and magical arrows that you can shoot at enemies, and so there is variety in terms of the combat, but I wouldn't exactly say that the combat is super in-depth, especially for modern standards. I would never say the bosses are too difficult either. Most of the time there's some kind of gimmick or mechanic that revolves around defeating them. Usually in terms of like the dungeon bosses, it's using the item that you had unlocked in that dungeon in order to defeat them. But in my opinion, most of the challenge in this game comes from exploration and puzzle solving. Now, the puzzles themselves aren't too bad. Most of the time, if I was stuck on a puzzle, it's just because I didn't know where the switch was or where the thing was that I could interact with in order to solve the puzzle. And exploration, it's not as hard for me just because I've played this game a multitude of times, and so I kind of know where everything is. But looking at this from a new player, I could see it being a little frustrating trying to navigate your way through the game without exactly knowing like what to interact with and what to do. Now, you are given a companion, Navi, who is a fairy, and Navi is kind of infamous in being kind of pestering. It's always saying like, hey, listen, as it's trying to give you advice that you've heard a million times before. And so a lot of people like to make fun of Navi. I actually kind of like Navi as a companion, just aesthetically, and I don't find the hey, listen as jarring as other players might. Navi will sometimes point you in the right direction, even if you don't want Navi to. But that Navi will basically say like, hey, maybe we should go check out the lake, or maybe we should go back to the Lost Woods. And so that's Navi trying to like push you in the direction you're supposed to go. This doesn't always work though, and sometimes it can be pretty easy to get lost. In the 3DS version, you do have these Sheikah stones that you can crawl through, and they'll basically show you like footage of what you need to do next. You are free to completely ignore that if you feel like it's cheating, but it is there for you to use if you don't feel like necessarily looking something up or following a walkthrough. Like seriously, some of the stuff, I'm just trying to look at it from a new player to this game. I wonder to myself, like, how would anyone figure that out aside from being told how to do it, especially for some of the more side content that you can do. Now, most of the side content is going to be doing various tasks for the townsfolk or exploring certain dungeons and caves, and your reward for doing a lot of this side content is going to be heart pieces. Basically, if you get 4 of these heart pieces, then you will gain an extra hit point. You are also going to be getting these full hearts after you complete every dungeon, and so you really don't need to do all the side content unless you're really bad at the combat in this game. Most of the time people do the side content for this game just in terms of the satisfaction of completion. In fact, there is like a whole challenge where you try to beat the whole game without getting any of the heart pieces. So by the end of the game, you only have like 3 of the hearts compared to, I think the max might be 20. As you are exploring through Hyrule and the dungeons, you're also going to be finding these gold spidery things. They kind of make a scratching, crawling noise when you get near them to notify you that there is one nearby. Basically, if you defeat one of these gold skulltulas, you are going to get a gold skull, and if you collect enough of these gold skulls, then you can go to a place that will reward you for hitting certain landmarks. This is the only way that you can upgrade your wallet bag. And that's one of my main complaints about this game is you don't have a lot of cool things to spend your rupees on, rupees being the currency in this game. So at first, you're only going to be able to hold up to 100 rupees. And yeah, you kind of need it at the beginning in order to get the shield, or maybe you want to like stock up on Deku nuts or something like that. But after a while, you can eventually upgrade your wallet size up to 500, and there's just not a lot of really cool things to spend your rupees on. You can purchase new tunics that allow you to navigate through new areas, but you can also get through those through other means if you don't feel like spending a ton of your rupees. And so, I don't know, it just felt like there wasn't really anything that I was saving up for, and so I was usually sitting at max capacity for rupees, thus making whenever I do discover new rupees, like a red rupee or a purple rupee, you know, it doesn't feel exciting because I'm already at max wallet capacity, and so these rupees are worthless to me. There's also a whole side quest that you can do where you basically buy masks from the mask salesman, who's one of the titular characters in Majora's Mask, and then you go find the right person to sell that mask to, and then you can have access to a new mask. I've never ever actually done this side quest. I usually sell the first mask to the first townsperson where it's like obvious who I'm supposed to give it to, and then I just couldn't be bothered to do the rest of the mask exchanges. It just feels like one extra errand that I have to run. Plus, you can only interact with the mask salesman as young Link, and the only way to go back to the past or the present time is you have to go back to the Temple of Time in order to time travel. The reward for this doesn't seem that great either, in my opinion, especially with access to the internet. As far as I understand it, it's like this mask that allows you to interact with these stones in order to give you hints, and in the 3DS version, you can already kind of do that with the stone that's in the Temple of Time. So it's kind of more of a completionist kind of thing. I like the Zelda in this game. I like when they do a Legend of Zelda without making the actual Zelda a damsel in distress and give her something to do. I'm not gonna exactly spoil what Zelda becomes in the future, but it is cool. Like, they do give her some cool characterization. I mean, she's almost up there alongside Twilight Princess Zelda and Wind Waker Zelda, in my opinion. Well, I do guess in Breath of the Wild they give Zelda a lot of characterization as well, so I think more often than not they actually make her an interesting character rather than just a damsel in distress, but I feel like it has happened at least a couple of times. I absolutely love the music. I know I've talked about it just a couple times already, but the music in this game is so iconic, and I could just listen to the soundtrack of this game over and over again. And we can't talk about this iconic game without actually talking about its effect on the Zelda timeline. So if you're not familiar, yes, there is a Zelda timeline linking all of these Legend of Zelda games together in some way. The idea is there's always going to be like a Link, there's always going to be a Ganondorf, and there's always going to be a Zelda of some kind. And so that's where the whole Triforce comes in, where Link has like the Triforce of Courage, Ganondorf has the Triforce of Power, and Zelda has the Triforce of Wisdom, and it's kind of destined that throughout time there will always be these 3 characters. The interesting thing about Ocarina of Time is it actually splits the timeline into 3 different timelines. I won't say how it does that for fear of spoiling the end game, but it is kind of interesting the way that they justify this timeline split. Now, would I say that this game is absolutely perfect? No. I don't think it deserves as high of a Metacritic score as it has. I think it's like at like a 98 or something. Like anytime you look up the top video games of all time, you're probably going to see the Ocarina of Time on there. And that's just because it's so iconic and it's so revolutionary to the video game industry, and it means so much to so many people. But it does have its flaws. For instance, Hyrule Field is pretty empty. Running around on your horse, you're just going to be running past a lot of landmarks. Like, yeah, sure, sometimes you'll find the big boulders that you can destroy, and inside there's some rupees or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, you're just going to go straight to your next destination unless you know where a heart piece is or a gold skulltula is. I also think some of the items that you get through dungeons and just through the main game progression are kinda non-exciting. Like, woohoo, you got really heavy boots, so now you can walk around on water. Or woohoo, you got boots where you can like hover in the air a little bit. Or woohoo, you get the Eye of Truth, which reveals secret hidden walls. Some of this stuff doesn't feel as exciting as other Zelda items are. I really like Zelda items that have its use in combat and in exploration, and it actually feels like fun and exciting to traverse using these items. All that being said though, like, this game is so wonderful and iconic and magical. I really like can't review this game without admitting that there's bias here. I mean, like, yeah, at the end of the day, I am going to give this game a 5 out of 5, and if you've never played Ocarina of Time before, I think you owe it to yourself to at least give it a try and see what the fuss is about. Play the 3DS version, in my opinion. Those quality of life features are really, really nice. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!